fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Chrissie is hilarious.
Chrissie, have you ever heard of the comedian Basha K. Ali?
No, that sounds like something you yell at before you blow up a plane.
Basha K. Ali!
30 seconds remaining.
But you know what good you say? I dabbled in stand-up for something. I haven't been disrespectful to you at all.
I was very confused by the title, Everything Everywhere All at Once, because that's also what we call it when Ash takes off his shirt. I shouldn't be up here. I should be in school on the other side of the ocean. Oh, welcome to another episode of the Chrissie Mayr podcast. We're streaming everywhere. This podcast is all over the place. We gotta be all over the place because I'm getting shadow banned left and right here. I just found out I'm search shadow banned on Twitter, but you can find us on, Facebook, Twitter, Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, Rumble, Rockfin. We're all over the place. Twitch. I haven't even been on my Twitch page, but this podcast does make its way to Twitch. Before I bring in our fabulous guest to talk about spicy topics, I have some shows to promote. I will be in Jersey. God, I can't, June is flying by. I feel like I blinked and we've only got 3 more days left in Pride Month. What are we going to do? We're going to rest our buttholes till next Pride Month. That's what we're going to do. You can come see me in Morris Plains, New Jersey, Saturday, July 8th at Tiff's Ale House. I love this venue. This is one of my absolute favorite venues to do comedy at, just because the vibe is great. Everyone who works here is awesome. Very strong drinks. Come see me in Jersey at Tiff's Ale House, Saturday, July 8th. Keanu Thompson, my very good friend, will be opening for me that day. It's just going to be an absolute blast. And then I'm heading back to Texas for Anime Matsuri. It'll be my first time at this convention. Let me know what I should cosplay as. I'm thinking maybe April O'Neil. I don't know. Maybe a white Little Mermaid. Maybe I'll mix it up. But if you're going to be at the convention, Anime Matsuri, August 10th through the 13th, I will be there. We'll have some kind of a Chrissie Mayr booth, some kind of a Simpcast panel in some capacity. We'll be there hanging out. And then you can see me that same weekend headlining at the Secret Group on Friday, August 11th. The hilarious and talented and vertically challenged Lila Hart will be opening for me at that show as well. So it's just going to be an awesome time. Get your tickets now if you know you're going to be at Anime Matsuri, Houston in August. It should be delightful. I can't wait to sweat my balls off. Okay, today's guest, you may know her from, earlier in this year during the midst. I can't believe it was still this year, all the Eliza Blue drama. She was somebody who I met who was doing a lot of really great research and digging up a lot of important nuggets about our favorite friend who was maybe fibbing a bit about being sex trafficked. We love Eliza Blue. And she's still out there. I think she's trying to make a comeback. Anyway, she's an independent journalist. She is a documentary filmmaker, and we are here today to talk about her new documentary, which is called Kidnap and Kill, an FBI Terror Plot. And she's here to talk to us about it today. Welcome, Christina. But you know her on Twitter as Radix Verum.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I think the last thing I'd ever want to do is make a documentary because it's so easy to have the idea, but God, it's a lot of work. And speaking of Eliza Blue, like our friend Farron was going to make an Eliza Blue documentary, and I don't know what the hell happened. But you probably can feel for her because you were just telling me before we went live of all the steps involved, all the interviews that have to happen, like
Yeah.
Probably there's
All the work that goes into it, it's crazy. And just so you know, the amount of editing once it's finished, when you go to interview people, you can be interviewing them for like 4 hours, and of 4 hours, maybe you're getting like 30 minutes of footage that is, usable or good. So it's like there's a lot that goes into that. You have to catalog all that footage. You have to go through and transcribe quotes and mark timestamps. It is like so much work. You've got to license music, get somebody to score it, because I will not do the kind of like documentary that is janky. Like if I'm doing something, it's going to be top notch or I won't do it. Yeah.
And the amount of money that you need and people that you need to employ to work on stuff. But who knows? Maybe there's people in the chat who can send you a song. I don't know. I'm just like,
yeah,
I'll help
right.
you edit something.
It's so funny because there are so many people who have like messaged me and reached out that are just like offering to help with like research or like little things like that, graphic design, all of that stuff matters. It's all important. And I do not have like a production team or a production company. I literally was just an independent journalist. I covered this story as it was unfolding, reporting on it. I listened into the trial. I traveled to Michigan to be there for the verdict in the retrial. And then I ended up interviewing one of the guys who was acquitted, talking to him. And then I was like, wow, I thought I knew this story, listening, covering it. And you don't until you talk to like the people who were actually involved. And I said, we've got to make this a documentary. I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I said that.
It's great because I think a lot of people forgot about this, because I'm just going to read the description from your trailer, which we're going to play in a minute. On October 8th, 2020, the FBI announced the arrest of 13 men who were allegedly attempting to formulate a plan to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. And again, this is right before the pandemic popped off. So this is October 2020. And I remember it. And then I feel like the pandemic stuff just took over. So they were formulating a plan to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer and otherwise use violence to overthrow state government. What does that sound similar to? This event, which was dubbed the Whitmer Fednapping Hoax, was astroturfed by every mainstream media outlet as proof that individuals that they consider far right are dangerous domestic terrorists. The FBI used a network of at least 12 informants and 2 undercover agents to create a domestic terror plot that never materialized. And again, did we ever hear from the mainstream media, oh, just kidding? Oh, it actually, nobody was trying to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, but people still remember, oh, yeah, didn't some far right dudes try to kidnap her? Like, that's what I feel like the public is left with in their memory.
Yeah,
when
absolutely.
the media doesn't go out of their way to correct anything.
Right. I mean, they all reported on this. Like when this happened, they loved it. It was 1 month before the election. I know I have to be careful about like what we're allowed to talk about here, but it was a month before the election, and it seems like it was done that way, like as if they were trying to wrap it up prior to that, because it's actually the FBI, like in their communications that are they're acknowledging like in September of 2020 that there is no plan. And then they start introducing like even more extreme elements to try to kind of make something or fabricate something. So, it's just a crazy story. They build this as like the biggest DT case in a generation. They said multiple militia groups were plotting.
DT?
What's that?
Did you say DT?
Yeah.
What does DT stand for?
I'm sorry, domestic terrorism.
Oh, okay.
I use this stuff because I know the algorithm will like suppress it, so I'm trying to use acronyms. But
you're trying to be smart, and I'm like,
their the big case, right? The biggest one in a generation, that they foiled this big plot that these multiple militia groups were planning, to overthrow the government. That's basically like what they allege. And then when you really start looking at it, it's like, well, where's the evidence for this? If this exists and this happened and you're going to make these very big claims, you have to be able to back that up. You're trying to send people to jail for the rest of their lives. And then you just start the way that it's presented too, which I think is so offensive and so egregious. When you read the initial criminal complaint that was signed off by Richard Trask, the federal agent who was suspended from the FBI after he and his wife attended a swingers party in Kalamazoo, and he tried to kill her, basically. He beat her, he strangled her, he bashed her head against a nightstand, he fled the scene of the crime in her vehicle intoxicated, and then had to negotiate his turning himself into local cops in his underpants in a Walmart parking lot. This is the guy who signed off on the criminal complaint. And when you read it, at no point do they mention their role in the plot. So you read it and it says essentially that a group of men, a militia group, the Wolverine Watchmen, and other militia groups conspired together to, I don't know, they don't even really say what the plan was, to kidnap her, but also, I guess, overthrow governments and things like this. Yeah. And then they added a superseding indictment and charged them with WMDs, or conspiracy to obtain WMDs. And then they said they had like an unregistered destructive device. So they make it sound like these guys, you know, they were going to blow up a bridge, they said, to slow police response to like her vacation cottage. But everything that you look at, like, this is just not true. It wasn't happening, despite the FBI's best efforts to make it happen. So they omit this information about, well, how did these guys meet each other? Are they all members of this militia group? When was this group created? Who was leading the group? Oh, the FBI, you know. Basically, the group was created in November 2019, mostly an online group. And then, of course, within just a few months, the FBI has infiltrated the group, and their informant becomes the leader, effectively the leader of the group, and he starts conducting their tactical training.
Wow, that was a perfect setup. I'm going to play the official trailer, and then we can get into, I guess, what was your first inkling that something was amiss here and that this was a topic to dive deeper into?
Earlier today, Attorney General Dana Nessel was joined by officials from the Department of Justice and the FBI to announce state and federal charges against 13 members of 2 militia groups who were preparing to kidnap and possibly kill me.
We're grateful to the FBI and law enforcement to
Oh, my internet. Great.
discover these domestic terrorists and stop them. You know, it's the sort of behavior you might expect from ISIS.
You might see a number that high in a sprawling narcotics conspiracy that stretches from coast to coast and beyond. That's a pretty high number in a case like this. It really reflects, I think, how deeply the government has been diving into this investigation to try to make these cases.
It was just literally a bunch of working class guys who on the weekend got together and, you know, exercised their rights and trained with firearms. So the FBI says, hey, we'll just pay for everything.
Who arranged the meeting? The FBI's paid provocateur. Robeson was getting paid to set this stuff up.
So they make the route, they set the locations, they make the plan, they do everything. And Adam's literally just sitting in the basement of a vacuum repair shop smoking blunts all day.
You're going to hear that my client was the leader of this group. But I think you're also going to hear that there was an election held to identify the leader, and it was Dana.
How can I frame a social situation to make this naive person appear to be a dangerous, violent terrorist? The whole goal was for the FBI to spend millions of dollars to create militia groups, record them saying offensive stuff, and then frame them in a fake conspiracy.
Woo! This looks so good.
Thank you.
And for someone who doesn't have a crew with them, it's very professional.
Yes, I have one editor that's it, who's helping. And then I have like just my friends.
This reminds me so much of kind of just the talk around January 6th, because even if you just, before we went live, I was Googling like FBI informant or FBI, infiltrating, and like the FBI informants, they infiltrated the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and it's like almost like once you get wind of any kind of informant or anybody from the FBI or any of these 3-letter agencies getting into this group, it's almost like I personally can't trust any bad news that comes out about them from that day on, because it's like you've been compromised, and you can have anybody you want infiltrated group and makes whatever you want happen to push whatever narrative you want about those people. You can very easily paint them as racist, violent, anything. And that's what happened with January 6th. And it's been going on for a long time. There were FBI informants who infiltrated BLM. It's been happening for forever.
Yeah, I would suggest, actually, since the foundations of the FBI, Lenin said that the best way to control the opposition is to lead it. And I think that for an agency like the FBI, they think the same thing. Like, we can control dissent, we can control, this maybe elements that might be dangerous to us by creating and controlling like our own DT groups or whatever you want to call it. They just infiltrate everything because they want to have their informants everywhere. And I think that the broader questions that come, especially from this case, like there is 6 terabytes of information and discovery. Most of that stuff is still under protective seal. But from what is available, it is very clear that the FBI has a massive informant network that rivals what the Stasi had in East Germany. Where I think it was like 1/3 of the population was like informing on the rest. So we know there's hardly any accountability or transparency in this program. Like, there's no oversight of the informant program, but we do know, as far as funding goes, that they're spending like $530 million a year on it. That's taxpayer money. And they might be spending more than that. Like, we really don't know. There's no way to audit the program. And I would suggest that they have these people, these informants, and I think it's calling them informants is incorrect, because they're not acting as like what you would expect a real informant would be doing, like in a legitimate law enforcement capacity. Like if there's, say, like a mafia operation going on and they're trying to take out the mafia, they might use an informant that is there to passively observe and record back what is happening. In this case, these people are not acting as informants to law enforcement. They're not informing on a crime because
they're not like
crime
a
exists.
fly on the wall. They're not just like, oh, I'm just going to be like a court stenographer. I'm just going to be in the bag taking notes. I'm just going to be like auditing.
Right. Well, how can you be an informant how can you be informing on a crime to law enforcement where no crime exists? So when these people are made informants, when the investigation begins, like, there is no crime that's happened. So what are they informing on? Like, what they're really doing is they're acting as agents provocateur. That is a more accurate description of their conduct in this case and what they were doing. You have these people that are already embedded in like militia groups or the Patriot movement. Some people who have been operating in that movement for maybe 20 years or more that are informants. They're leading these groups. They're in leadership positions. They're administering Facebook pages like the FBI is. The FBI, we learned, has what they call undercover, online undercover, like covert employees. So it's an agent who literally their job is to have fake personas online and to administer and run these like Facebook pages. One of the informants that like made friends with the targets of this investigation online was an agent posing as a woman named Elise Marie. The agent's name is Lauren Hastings, but like she's just posing as this other agent's girlfriend online. And this guy, this agent, he's posing as someone named Mark Woods, is again like somebody in the militia or Patriot movement. So you have no idea how many other people they have that are still informants, that are still operating on social media, various social media platforms. And it's very disturbing when you start trying to look at and answer very basic questions for this investigation, like why, how do these people, how do they meet each other, right? How are they introduced to each other? Because it seems as if they don't actually know each other in the beginning, and they're introduced to each other by the FBI informants. The only thing that like is the consistent aspect of this is the presence of the FBI and their desire to manufacture terrorism cases and pursue them. You know, like post 9/11, they were doing this focus more on like Muslims. You know, they would go into mosques and they would target like vulnerable people with developmental disabilities, and then try to entrap them. And this is like a well-known thing now. There was a study by a professor at SUNY Fredonia in 2015 that studied 580 terrorism cases in America, studied the prosecution of these cases, and they found that out of that many, over 300 showed involved informants and showed aspects of entrapment. So it really calls into question not just this case, like what we've seen in this case and how crazy and disgusting and corrupt it is, but it really makes you wonder, well, what about all of these other prior cases? The implication is that they all have to be re-examined, and I think that that is why they want to just sweep this under the rug.
You wonder if like these agent provocateurs that get into these groups, you wonder, is it their goal to get to a point where nobody trusts any group, nobody joins any group because they're afraid of basically spies either steering the group in a direction no one wants it to go? You know, it's like, do you think their goal is to just have folks lose their sense of community and not engage in these groups for fear of, being labeled some kind of domestic terrorist? Or do you think their goal is more just they're a means to an end? They want to create domestic terrorism and they don't really care what the result is, like what happens to the group.
So I think that there's multiple answers for that, right? I think that on the individual level, these agents are promoted based on getting these kinds of big cases. We actually saw that in this case. We know, for example, that Agent Schweers was promoted from the Los Angeles field office to the DC field office. We know that Dan Tuono, the man who was head of the Detroit field office at the time, he's promoted by Christopher Wray to be the assistant director of the DC field office prior to January 6th. That's a different story. We'll go back to that because it has to do with what happened at the Capitals and the connection there. But so I think that on the individual level, the agents get performance metrics because the FBI self-imposes these quotas on themselves. We need this amount of DT cases. We want to start going after people for, they come up with these terms. DVE is the latest one. They have racially motivated DVE, and like they just come up and like make up this stuff. Domestic violent extremist. That's the new term for it. So yeah, it's like
parents who attend school board meetings.
Exactly,
who want teachers transing their kids.
Catholics attending a Latin mass.
Yeah, Catholics who want to go to church during the pandemic. Right.
Exactly. So they come up with this vague terminology. They make this stuff up to justify their existence. They sell this fear to the American public. There are gullible people who want to be told, oh, these are the bad guys, Now it's this person. It used to be Al-Qaeda and ISIS, but forget about that. This is the new bad guy. They just trot this stuff out when it's convenient for them. And then they request millions of dollars, budget increases. Oh, yes, we have to take more of your rights away. Oh, but we have to do it so that we can be safe. For your safety.
It's so disgusting. Like, and you listen to older people talk, well, the world's gone crazy now. Oh, everyone's messed up. Oh, and it's like, no, actually, this is heartbreaking to hear about, because it's like we could still be in kind of like the golden age of this country. Like things could still be so good, and things don't have to be this chaotic. Like when you learn that this chaos is created specifically for a purpose, as a means to an end, to push agendas, to push policy, it's so disgusting, because it's when you learn about how it's like it's not happening by mistake. You just feel so manipulated. and
And
taken advantage
betrayed.
of. Yeah.
Yeah. These
And
are
that
the
this is
people that
our
are supposed
tax
to protect you.
money
Right.
is what pays for this.
Exactly. And so there's that level. There's these incentives that they get professionally within their career. And they like that. They give themselves awards all the time. That's the other thing the FBI does. They hold these silly events. They give each other awards. They pat each other on the back. And that's their incentive. Organizationally, the FBI is competing with other federal law enforcement agencies. There's DHS, for example. We have these fusion centers. We have local state law enforcement. Really, the FBI isn't needed, in my opinion. And so I think that they need to constantly justify their existence. This is why you need us. This is also why you need to give us more money each year. That's good for them. But I also think that the U.S. has to have this narrative of, there's an enemy. I think that they also want to criminalize dissent. That's happening more and more. And they're also trying to criminalize associations. So the latest thing now that comes from this case and the precedent that is set from it is militia groups are now considered gangs. Typically, to be considered a gang, a criminal organization, you have to show there's a criminal enterprise happening, right? Like for street gangs, they're usually trafficking and selling narcotics. They usually have street enforcers that are selling drugs, and there's a criminal enterprise occurring. There's money changing hands. There's things that are actual crimes happening. With these militia groups, they didn't have that. So they can't create task forces. The FBI wants to work with state and local law enforcement to create these task forces that they have for violent gangs. It just so happens the main informant in this case was a veteran who was very good friends with a Detective Ramirez, who was part of the Michigan police and was on one of these gang task forces, had an FBI superior, and they decide that now these militia groups, we're going to call them gangs so we can make task forces and arrest these people and basically just criminalize what is normal law-abiding activity. Because what happened in this case is that the FBI created these training exercises. Their informants led the FTXs, field training exercises. And what that was the kind of militia training that you see anywhere. You can pay for defensive training. It was on private property. They had medical training and stuff like this. It's the stuff these militia groups have been doing for years that is perfectly legal, but they'll film everything, they record things, and then they just take it out of context to try to create this very scary narrative. But that's all it is. It's smoke and mirrors.
And it goes along with the broader agenda pushed by our culture that's very anti-white, that's very anti-masculinity. All masculinity is now toxic masculinity. I mean, I feel like it's hard enough for
anti-self-defense. You can't even defend yourself if you're the wrong person. You're supposed to let somebody mug you or steal your property or, enter your home like the McCloskeys. You should let apparently a mob of people overrun your yard and come into your home and threaten you. And you don't get to defend yourself. That's what they would like.
That kid on TikTok. Oh my God, I'm such an old person. That kid on the TikTok. There's this black teenage kid on TikTok. I think he's British or whatever, and he got called out on some show because he goes viral. He just breaks and enters into people's homes, and he's like, "Oh, it's just a character," and everyone's like, "You're gonna get shot." You know what I mean? Not if you keep this up. And of course, if that ever happens, it's just about race, and it's kind of glorified because it gets attention and clicks and it goes viral, and you feel so manipulated when you start putting together all the pieces of you're like, this is exactly what they want to have happen.
Yeah.
They can't completely take all of our guns away from us just yet, but they can use FBI informants, and they can push a narrative to make it seem like you just exercising your rights makes you some kind of gang member.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and that's really, I think, the scariest part about it is saying that these groups are now gangs because of what? Like, how are they being classified as a gang? Gang membership are some of the charges that the guys in the state case have for this. The ones that were charged with providing material support because they let this group that the FBI framed do an FTX at their property, or they taught somebody how to tie a tourniquet. Well, now you just provided material support. Now you're a gang member. And half of these guys, like, they don't even know each other, and like they weren't part of this group. They were never members of like the Wolverine Watchmen. It wasn't even like a real militia group. It was like a Facebook page where they were trying to like put together, like just getting like-minded guys together to go and do this like very regular militia training.
This is exactly like what happened to the Proud Boys. The Proud Boys were formed as like a men's social group, kind of as a joke to get their buddy laid. And it was just they're hanging out and they're just talking about like, yeah, maybe don't watch so much porn. Maybe don't like jerk off so much. Maybe, I don't know, buy a leather jacket. Maybe go to the gym. And they eventually started escorting the likes of Ann Coulter, the likes of Steven Crowder, to speak at colleges and events where Antifa would prevent these people from doing their jobs, doing their speaking engagements, and then over time became sort of the answer to Antifa.
It's so weird because these some of these guys in this case, they worked event security for some of these events, right? These militia groups were often contracted or hired by the Republicans in that area to provide like event security for this very reason. So, by the way, some of these guys in this case, they worked security for Whitmer's political opponent back in the day. So there could be like a very personal reason that she's gone after these guys. And I have verified that. I have seen their badges that they, I've seen things that have been shown to me that verify that, like, yes, they were working event security. That was well known. There was a media article that literally reported on it and said that, like, we're a local Michigan media group, like went and hung out with them for the day, and like they took this journalist to like the shooting range, and she had reported that they were actually trying to de-escalate things at these events, these like militia guys. And the attorney general commented and basically said, no, these guys are violent and dangerous. And then this like local media, they put out like a correction about their article, like, oh, you dare portray these people in like a semi-positive light. And so it's just like, what is going on here? It's very bizarre, very disturbing. There's so many other crazy parts of this case. I mean, I don't even know where to begin to just get into all of the corruption.
Like, it sounds like when you hear a story of like a crazy manipulative woman who like wants to get her boyfriend thrown in jail, so she like pretend like she hits herself and throws herself down the stairs and like does all this, scratches herself, does all this crazy shit, takes photos of it, and then like the boyfriend ends up in prison. I feel like that is like a microcosm of what's happening to all men in this country. Anyone strong, anyone in any kind of, who served any time in the military, anyone who is, like practices their Second Amendment. I feel like strong men are being manipulated, weaponized against. I really think they're trying to be squashed because I think the government just doesn't want anybody that could even begin to team up against them. They want everyone weak and scared and alone and separated. And I think this is the way to take down strong men, basically.
Yeah, that's a good point. Or to get them scared to associate with each other, or heaven forbid, encourage each other to like be proficient in self-defense so they can defend their families or something. So another thing to consider, like as this whole thing was going down, while the FBI was, running around with these informants trying to stitch this group together, the backdrop of all of this is what's happening in 2020 in Michigan specifically. But you have the, what do we call them? Mostly peaceful protests.
Yes, very peaceful.
Yes, where, buildings are looted and cities burned to the ground. Like people are concerned. And also like her lockdowns, she admits, were the harshest in the country. And then I think that the Supreme Court of Michigan ruled that they later ruled they were unconstitutional. So she was doing this crazy stuff. She wouldn't let people buy like seeds or something. She wouldn't let barbers cut hair. It was just insanity. Wow. And it almost seems like they were trying to create like a pressure cooker where they could get something like this off the ground, where they wanted to just kind of like, hey, let's create this situation where we can cause as much chaos as possible. Because one of the things that happened, right, was the government alleges that the first origins of this plan occurs at a meeting in Dublin, Ohio, that the government billed as a nationwide meetup of militia groups. So they say that this nationwide meetup of militia groups occurred and that these guys were plotting to overthrow various state governments or whatever. At the Dublin meeting, it's actually the FBI's meeting. They are the ones who call and chair the nationwide meetup of militia groups. It is their informant, Steve Robeson, who is a convicted PEDO, which, by the way, the FBI kept out of their own internal paperwork when discussing his lengthy criminal history, which is a 20-year criminal history that involves things like fraud and petty crimes. He's the one calling and chairing the meeting. They lied about that. They said Barry organized that meeting. Barry is one of their targets who was a truck driver from Delaware, father of 3, middle-aged man. And it's just crazy. So they're the ones that call and share this meeting, and they are the ones suggesting kind of like crimes to people. Their informant is running around trying to hype people up, telling them they're in your backyard, give them no quarter. And in fact, in Ohio, there were mostly peaceful protests happening that night. And these informants were trying to rile these guys up and encourage them. They're trying to get them to go armed into what is basically a conflict zone. And like you have to ask yourself, if the FBI claims they're protecting people, what are they doing here? Like, they're saying one thing privately, or like, yeah, so they say one thing, like they admonish their informants not to take leadership positions and not to suggest crimes. But all that we see is their informants in leadership positions suggesting crimes. They'll say publicly that Barry and Adam were the ringleaders of this and that they're dangerous criminal masterminds and DTs, whatever. But then privately to each other, they're making fun of them. They're laughing about them. Special Agent John Penrod is texting informant Jenny Plunk, and they're saying about Barry, for somebody who seems like he's itching for a fight, boy, does he seem to be a coward. They're calling him pussy, moron, bonehead, coward. And they're like laughing about him. So they're saying publicly, oh, these guys are dangerous. Wow. And then privately, they're laughing at them, and they're like, "Yeah, these guys are," because
they know they're not a threat. They know
exactly. They're big and scary, but we're gonna laugh about them. We're gonna try to get them to go armed into a riot, in Ohio. And it makes you wonder too, what is the role of the informants in those groups that were engaging in mostly peaceful protests, where pallets of bricks just appeared, right? And these black SUVs are driving around. Seemingly, they have organized groups. They had people that were holding umbrellas. Like they have different. You can tell that they had a organized nature to what was occurring, and it really makes me wonder if that was done on purpose and if they had a hand in that. And in fact, there is a question of whether one of the undercover agents in the Whitmer case was also involved in trying to set up a Denver BLM activist for trying to assassinate an attorney general in Colorado. He went by the same name, Red. He went by UCE Red in this case. And in that case, he went by Red also. And he kind of posed as like an explosives expert, just like he did in the Whitmer case. So it's like, oh, they're infiltrating both groups. And then they're trying to create this conflict, and then they can use these events to say, oh, look, this is why you need the FBI, so we can protect you from these people.
Exactly. I'm reminded of a tweet that Tim Pool put out recently. Remember when AOC said J6 may have been an inside job? That was crazy. And here's this tweet where you can hear basically Capitol officers detailing characteristics and identifiers of undercover officers infiltrating the crowd. There's a guy in here, short hair, describing him physically, thin blue line. He's got a 27 on his hip, no police identification on him at all. And then they're saying, oh, he should be wearing his wristband. He should be, and their guns will have a candy stripe on the barrel. Like all these specific things that they would not know about it, just a random person. And it very much points to like, oh yeah, this is all on purpose here.
Short guy, dark hair, black vest, thin blue line thing on, dark hair, and he's got like a little 27 or something on his hip. No police identification on him at all. Couldn't get to him because there were so many people. But just keep an eye on white male, dark hair. All right. It looked like a grayish black, maybe digital
your non-uniform guys have any identifiers? Like
they will have a wristband. Their guns will have a candy stripe on the barrel. Okay. I don't know the wristband color, but they'll have a wristband somewhere. Okay.
Huh. So there's multiple types of wristbands, it sounds like. It's just wild. And the big excuse why they didn't put out more J6 footage is they're like, oh, well, we don't want to, out all of our informants. That was supposed to be the reason why they didn't release all the J6 footage.
Yeah, you could not, you can't make this stuff up if you wanted to. That right there confirms, I think what everybody was saying. And just to go back to and follow back on what we talked about, this issue, right, of this one agent that is involved in the Whitmer thing in J6, D'Antuono. So during this investigation, at one point, there are these anti-lockdown rallies that are happening in Michigan. And they're kind of like big events. It's not just one group of people, like right-wing people or left-wing people. Everybody kind of came together to say, we're against the lockdowns because it was affecting people, economically. They couldn't work, they needed to pay their bills. So she was very unpopular at that time. And I think that part of this whole thing was demonizing people criticizing lockdowns and mandates, because at this, there's one of these that happens in April of 2020, April 30th of 2020. There was another one like the week before or 2 weeks before that at the Capitol at Lansing. So some of the members of the Watchmen are there. The informant Chappell's there. He's wearing a wire. He is basically talking to his handler agents. They're listening in real time, and they actually have agents stationed around the Michigan Capitol. So these guys are there. They're carrying their firearms. They're wearing plate carriers. Some of them are wearing masks. Basically, they're there looking like a militia group. So the informant says to the handling agents on his wire, oh, I think these guys are getting ready to do something. He doesn't say why or what they're doing that would make him think that. But the FBI calls the Lansing Capitol Police and says, we want you to stand down, open the doors to the Capitol and let everybody in. And so these guys, they stand in line to get in. They go through COVID screening. They get their temperatures checked. They basically occupy the building for a couple hours.
Safe, yes.
Yeah, of course, because that's what everybody that's an insurrectionist goes through, COVID screening, right? And so they go inside, they occupy the building for a few hours, and they leave peacefully. Nothing, they don't do anything. But the media took pictures of these guys. And I almost feel like the media coordinated with the FBI because they made sure that the pictures of the Watchmen.
There were camera crews there. There was the people there. I think doing a documentary on Pelosi or something.
Well, for J6, yes. But at the Lansing Capitol, I think there was the same thing was going on because the media, there were tons of people there that day. The likelihood that the pictures that get on the news the next day are the Wolverine Watchmen guys in there out of hundreds of people, they went and the media took the pictures of the Watchmen, splashed it all over the news. And then the Watchmen were talking internally oh, look at all this media attention we're getting. Oh, more people can join our group. That was the goal of the FBI. We need to recruit more people into this group because it's not a real militia group and nothing's happening. So get their pictures out there. And it kind of made the guys feel a little, I think, emboldened too, because they're oh, wow, look, we're getting media attention by showing up to these events. So that was an interesting aspect of this. But the agent overseeing the Detroit field office while this whole operation occurred with Stephen D'Antuono. He is promoted 1 week after these guys are arrested. He's promoted October 13th, 2020 to be the assistant director of the DC field office. He's promoted by Christopher Wray, and he's there the day that January 6th happens. And we know it's like, oh, so this is just the Whitmer thing was the dry run, and then J6 is the national level of that. And it's the same guy in charge. And then he's also there when the Mar-a-Lago raid happens. And now conservatives are celebrating him because he spoke out against that. And he called that politicized. And it's like, excuse me, sir, are you not the person who was almost in charge, like the number 2 in charge of the DC field office on J6, and you were involved in the Whitmer thing? I think you need to answer questions about that. But the Republicans of the Weaponization Committee, they had this guy, they interviewed him, they asked him questions, and they don't ask him about J6 and like his role. None of that. They don't ask him about Whitmer. They're just like, oh, so you think, the raid on Trump was politicized and you complained, oh, what a hero. And it's like, he's covering his ass. That's what's happening. Excuse me.
Generally didn't make the connection between the two events. They didn't know he was involved because...
Yeah, do they not know this? Am I more informed than like Jim Jordan? It really makes you wonder, like, who dropped the ball on that? What staffer, didn't know that this is the guy that led the charge on J6 too, by the way, of like the shock and awe campaign of going after the Mimas and stuff for their guided tour. It is just like amazing to me. He lied about the so-called pipe in the J6 pipe thing. Yeah, he lied about that. And it's like, we're going to celebrate this guy, of course. And just like not ask him those questions when we had him there. That is literally like what the GOP does every year. So I don't know why we'd be surprised.
And I remember like right after the day, like it was so horrible. Ashley Babbitt being murdered. And I remember hearing that day, like, or maybe in the couple days after, like, oh yeah, a couple of people had heart attacks. And to watch that over the weeks and months get turned to multiple people were killed that day. And it's like, no, they're trying so hard to like the dudes are like the police that ended up having heart attacks or something unrelated. Them trying to push that into the body count to make it seem like, oh, the most deadly day ever.
Yeah, they still repeat the lie about Officer Sicknick and the fire extinguisher or whatever. They just like make up these narratives and then they just keep repeating them. And they think if they just repeat them enough, it just becomes truth. And unfortunately, if they're not called out for it, that actually does happen. And that's why I think that, making the documentary is important, at least for the Whitmer case, because right now that is the narrative. Like when Barry's daughters, when they Googled their dad, what comes up is like dangerous domestic terrorist, and it's not true.
In the trailer, like who was the guy with like the ginger beard? Was that an informant? Like who was that?
No. Okay, so that's Brandon. He's been acquitted. He was framed by the FBI. Him and Daniel Harris were both acquitted in this case. So at their first trial, that trial ended in 0 convictions for the government. They coerced 2 men to take plea deals early on, Ty Garbin and Caleb Franks. Then they went to trial, and Brandon and Daniel were completely acquitted by the jury. They could not come to a conclusion to Adam and Barry. And I believe that is because of Judge Yonkers' ruling where he would not give the definition of WMDs to the jury. I think that's what they were hung up on, was that kind of question of did these guys, did they try to obtain WMDs or whatever? And I think that's what they were hung up on. But
what's the WMD? Is that the kind of the weapon you mentioned?
Weapons of mass destruction.
Okay. Oh,
you think of a WMD, you're thinking of like C4 or something like that. What they're really talking about was like towards the end of this, nobody had done anything. There was no plan. Like the group was splintering. The informants couldn't get anyone to do even the lower crimes they suggested. Like in the informant, Dan, he suggests that they drive, and fire rounds into different governors' mansions. He suggests that they do something to Whitmer's vacation cottage and make it look like an accident. He suggests that they do drive-by shootings. He suggests that they take tannerite and put it in the driveway of her home and then shoot it to explode it. He said something about doing a drive-by shooting and then mailing the shell casings to the politicians and doing that to like numerous governors. Now, this informant claims these were all de-escalation tactics. And that's true in the sense, all he's de-escalating from, though, is other crazier things he's already suggested. And then this is less extreme. So in a way, it is a de-escalation tactic, but not for the group. They were not suggesting crazy things and he was trying to de-escalate their talk. No. He's suggesting this stuff and they're like shooting it down and they're like, no,
Wow.
like one of them says, we're not black bagging politicians. I swear to God,
Wow.
they've got Dan Harris saying things like, these guys had crazy ideas. We shut them down pretty quickly. Like the idea that a kidnapping was going to occur was literally laughable to some of these guys. So when informants, mentioned these things, I think that in a sense, some of these people didn't take it seriously. There wasn't a red flag of like, oh, I should be careful. I'm talking to an informant. I think they thought it was more like a joke or that these guys were just trying to do tough talk, because this is the thing that happens with guys. You get a bunch of guys together, they're at firearms culture. If anyone knows anything about militia culture or gun culture, like they try to like impress each other. And when you get a bunch of them, like 20 guys together at one of these training exercises, they're drinking beer. The FBI is supplying, marijuana by the ounce for these guys. And they've got about 5 different informants wearing recording devices. So you can imagine the kinds of things that are said, like when you've got a group of guys just sitting around drinking,
right, and
stoned,
they're
and
hyping each other up. They're trying
to sound cool.
They're
Dan
exaggerating.
Chappell, their informant, he's telling his war stories. He tells these guys he's part of the elite unit that rescued Chris Kyle, the sniper, an American hero, and he's telling them about Qatar and Baghdad. And none of these guys have like military experience. They think that this informant is like amazing. It's why they made him the leader of their group. They would have done anything, basically, this guy said, especially Adam, the homeless man that was living in the basement of the vac shack that was framed as the ringleader of the group.
Is that the guy who they mentioned? They said was just the guy was just like smoking weed in the store.
Yeah. He really was taken advantage of. Adam has no criminal record. He's got no history of violence. This was a man he'd just gone through a divorce. That's why he was living in the basement of the vac shack where he, was working, because he let her have the house and kind of just like, I think he'd gone through a really hard time. He's in a vulnerable position. He's just living in the basement of the vac shack.
They were grooming this guy.
They were grooming him and they preyed on him. Like they had numerous informants like working him, trying to manipulate and influence him. His girlfriend, Amanda Keller, there's questions about whether she was working for the FBI because she's the one that introduces Adam to undercover Mark Schlier. So this comes from these out-of-court statements that the judge wouldn't let the jury see, but this is all exculpatory in nature, and these were things picked up by the FBI, the informants, of them saying incriminating things. But one of the things here is a direct message. This is Adam's girlfriend. It says, hey, brother, this is Mark. This is how the FBI talks to you. By the way, this is an undercover agent on Facebook posing as a guy named Mark Woods.
He reaches know how they talk.
Listen to this. He's reaching out to him. He's undercover, and he says, hey, brother, this is Mark using my girlfriend's account. Elise was talking to your fiance, Amanda, about getting more involved, and Amanda suggested I contact you. So
First of all, guys, I know that this is bullshit out the gate. There's no way in hell a man, like I think of my guy friends, my husband, my brother. Yeah. There's no way that a man would go to this much effort to like deliver a message. First of all, I can't log into my account. All right, fuck it. Like no one's gonna go to the trouble of using their girlfriend's account
to DM
to like pass along a message. Oh, my girlfriend, wife said this, that, you want to get more involved. Guys don't care that much. This is why guys don't really hang out with each other after they get married or whatever. Like the average dude is not putting in this much effort. That's why that sentence glows to me.
Right? Or they say crazy stuff like this is their informant Steve Robeson, who's the FBI created a fake militia group called the Patriot 3%ers. So they created their own version, I guess, of like the 3%er group. Steve Robeson is the one that calls and chairs the nationwide meetup of militia groups at Dublin. He's posing as the head of the Wisconsin chapter of this fake militia group. Jenny Plunk is posing as the head of the Tennessee chapter of this fake militia group. They tell Adam he's going to be the leader of Michigan, and they induct him into a fake militia group. They go, oh yeah, you're head of the Michigan chapter of the Patriot 3%ers. The FBI creates the Facebook page, and the informants are administering it. And then they tell Adam he needs to recruit people for this fake militia group. And the only people that he recruits, this big ringleader, is his fiance, Amanda. It's Dan Chappell, the informant, who's really running things. Steve, is the other informant. And then he brings in his friend, Sean Fix, who, by the way, during the summer of 2020, is lying to everybody and pretending he's a Navy SEAL operator and veteran. So these are the only people. And it's not even like, it isn't a group, nothing happens. They just give them titles. They're like, oh, yes, Dan Chappell's the commanding officer. So the informant is the commanding officer of the fake group that the FBI created and made the Facebook page for. They also gave Adam business cards. And then the FBI seized them later when they arrested him to say he was like a member of this militia group. And it's like, okay, but you guys just made those cards. You gave it to him. And then you seize it as evidence later when you arrest him. I'm sorry, but that is the definition of entrapment. So Robeson, the guy who's the head of the Wisconsin chapter of this fake group, he's saying, this is at the Dublin meeting where the FBI says these defendants are first conspired to kidnap Whitmer. He says, you can't just grab brick and mortar without an effing human to go with it. You've done nothing but grab brick and mortar. Then another informant responds to that and says, you take brick and mortar, you've locked yourself down in one spot and made yourself a target. That entire team just lost their lives. And then Robeson, the other informant, replies to that informant and says, we did not leave that meeting with a plan. Or that informant says to Steve that they didn't leave the meeting with a plan. Steve responds and says, no, we didn't. And I'm a little frustrated about that. But what we do know that we have to communicate this group right here. So this is and this shows, number one, there is no agreement in Dublin. There's no plan. The origins of the plan that the FBI talks about, that's coming from them and their informants. They're the ones saying this crazy stuff. And then everybody else is like shooting it down. So when you go through this stuff, it's just time after time after time. It is informants saying crazy things or trying to get people to think about having plans and goals and telling them that this is to help with their training. Because Dan says, oh, I was in the military. This is what we do to get the guys focused. We have to pretend that we've got a plan or a goal or like a mission, but it's just like he's lying. He just tells them it's just to keep people focused. So when they are saying that Adam was saying this, Adam is saying that, that he's recorded, by these wires saying the stuff. What they leave out is he's literally repeating verbatim what the informants just said to him, because Adam is trusting and naive and doesn't understand. He thinks that this is like, oh, we're just doing this for training. We just have to have a goal. He literally says at one point, we're just LARPing.
Wow, this reminds me so much of the FBI informants trying to recruit like regular people so that they can frame them for being like DTs. It reminds me of like my early days in comedy when like the comedy clubs like, look, you can perform, but you need to bring 8 people. Like it reminds me of the Bringer show, and you're so like scraping and scrambling. You're asking your coworkers. You're like trying to make friends at work. Like, you want to come to my comedy show? Like, I swear it'll be fun. I need you to come, or else I can't do my 8 minutes. You got to buy 2 drinks. I'm like, okay, come on. It sounds like a Bringer show.
It's ridiculous, right? It's the silliest thing you'll ever hear. Here's informant Dan picked up on audio recording saying, what is our goal? Are we just training for everything? What's the we're trying to focus in on, because you can train for effing everything, but if you want to have an end game, that's what we need to deploy our resources to. This is their informants coming up with this talk of having an end goal and a game and or a plan and goals.
It sounds just like the
ridiculous.
recordings that we have all heard of Ray Epps from J6, where he's trying to be like, we gotta go into the building, we gotta go in the Capitol, and everyone around him is like, really? We don't really want to do that.
It's like insane. Here he is. Here's Dan sending a text message to one of the targets of the investigation. He says, definitely, man, think about those things too, as far as quote unquote goals to hit. Another would be money. Think it mentioned, but we didn't go further. 28th, we can go more. Dan is pushing having a goal or objective. And then he's saying, you know, for these FTXs, like, that's what they're told. They're like, oh, we need to raise money to host these like field training exercises, you know, because they'll have like, they have the tactical training, they've got the medical training, they do food, and they try to build these events as like family friendly events. And they really wanted to make them fun, because what the FBI was doing was creating these fake militia groups, then finding people online. So that's another thing we learned, that actually the FBI has a database of people that they want to target, basically. And they will give the informants access to the database to make contact with them online. That's what happened in this case.
And they use Facebook to make it seem exactly.
Right.
They should just call Facebook Fedsbook at this point.
Because
all who use it are boomers and feds.
I will not use it. And if you do use it, only use it for, you know, professional stuff, and just be very careful about people DMing you, private messaging you, and the kinds of things that they will do, like to try to set people up. Like, I mean, they will plan this stuff for years. The FBI literally just arrested a developmentally disabled man as soon as he turned 18 for, quote, providing material support for ISIS. You know what happened? This is a developmentally disabled child that the FBI had a female agent make contact with when he was 16 years old. And this kid was giving her gift cards. And over 2 years, the total of this material support was like $900 he'd sent her in gift cards. Now, this kid, in his
the
mind,
definition of grooming. It's vulnerable people, it's minors. They separate them from their family or spouses or whatever.
And they pick people vulnerable, susceptible to manipulation. Someone with a developmental disability, somebody who is mentally unable to understand what's happening to them, and that they are being manipulated, and will just kind of say anything to avoid conflict or confrontation. Like, that's the kind of person that they want, and they will target, and they'll develop these relationships over time. Like I said, it can be 2 years that this kid, maybe it's the first time a girl has talked to him or expressed interest in him. It reminds me of like an OnlyFans situation, right? Where this kid, you know, this was like his OnlyFans thing. Instead of being an OnlyFans subscriber, he sent this girl gift cards. He probably thinks she's spending the money to go get like her hair done. He doesn't think he's funding ISIS. Even if she's saying that, like, he's a developmentally disabled teenage boy. He's giving this girl gift cards because he likes her, and she's giving him attention and talking to him. That's all it is. But they will try to destroy this child's life and not feel bad about it at all. They'll celebrate themselves as heroes for doing it.
What's next? The FBI got to infiltrate OnlyFans girls, because they would be in a position to manipulate guys, because they
exactly.
I'm thinking they get a lot of gift cards.
They might have exactly. Who knows? And then just to have maybe even blackmail potential on people.
Right. Just Epstein on a smaller level.
Exactly. Yeah. Nothing would surprise me at this point. And, you know, at least the things we've learned from the agents in this case, the 3 lead agents that were handling it, they all seem to be personally grotesque individuals. I almost think that the FBI has some kind of like screening thing where they're literally wanting like a sociopathic individual, or somebody that doesn't have the same like moral compass that a regular person would have, and that those are the people that they advance. You know, I'm sure they have some kind of psychological profiling or screening they do, and I think that that's what they want. You know, Jason Chambers, one of the lead agents in this case, he had a private intelligence company called Exa Intel that, while he's working this DT case, his private company is seeking contracts, $1 million contracts with the federal government to advise them on DT cases. He is in internal emails saying he's telling other FBI agents, I'm going to be retiring from the Bureau. I'm going to be transitioning into the private sector. And basically he's starting this for-profit company. And he's trying to sell event security to politicians and state governments. It's crazy. And it's so wild that he gets away with this stuff. And, nobody thinks that's a big deal. Like they say here, he may have been breaking the law. He tried to conceal what he was doing in this. He sent emails saying, so this is an email he sent where he talks about, Shelley and I are daily planning and preparing for Exit Intel to go live. He says, I have been preparing things at the office so I can leave the Bureau and join Exit Intel full time very soon after it's funded. I am currently the acting supervisory special agent of my squad, which has allowed me to reallocate resources such that my eventual exit will be relatively painless. What FBI resources is he reallocating to launch his private for-profit business while he's still working at the FBI? This woman, Shelley, that he's paying with taxpayer money, he's paying her as an informant, and she's apparently working for his private company to prepare it to go live. And from what I understand, he was paying her as a CHS. So you just kind of wonder, this is all of them. As I said, Richard Trask, the guy who signed the criminal complaint, he gets arrested for trying to basically murder his wife. And then Impala, the other lead handling agent, he made a statement along the lines of, this is when they burned their own informant and arrested him on a firearms charge. This was during his interrogation in December of 2020, after these guys were arrested, when they made him sign an NDA and basically said, you can't expose the entrapment role of all this. He says, quote, we have a saying in our office, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. He said that to the informant, the FBI agent, in this interrogation where they force him to sign an NDA, their own informant. And they prevent him, from taking the stand. They don't call him as a witness. And it's just it's crazy. These are the agents. And he's been accused, by the way, Impala, he's been accused of perjury in another case. In fact, a U.S. attorney, or former U.S. attorney, Brian Lennon, wrote a letter to the Stuart Platt, the assistant director of the FBI, Stephen D'Antuono, who, as I said before, was head of the Detroit field office at the time, saying basically that Impala had committed perjury in this prior case, and he thought that his misconduct was so bad, he was basically recommending that they have the FBI's OPR, internal affairs, investigate his conduct. He was referring him for criminal investigation. He was trying to suggest that. It's the Office of Professional Responsibility inside the FBI that internal affairs is part of. So they basically, this former, assistant U.S. attorney for the Western District of Michigan had said, hey, this guy, he committed perjury in this prior case. I think it was so bad, I believe you guys should investigate him for misconduct. That letter was sent in February of 2020. 1 month later, Impala is a lead handling agent in this case. So you have to ask, did the FBI investigate this guy at all? And why is it that every agent involved seems to be involved in misconduct and at least very questionable activities in their own personal lives?
You're a wealth of information, Christina. There's been a lot of interesting comments in the chat. This one from Lisa Ballerini. One of the J6 guys I know is from my town in Maryland, and he was developmentally slow. I know that he was groomed. It's exactly what you're describing, where they take advantage. From Little Sausage, my psych professor wrote the test for the Special Forces selection. He said they are testing for sociopathic traits, but don't want someone who is all the way there where they can't work in groups. Yeah, of course, you want somebody who can take orders, who respects authority. From Jimmy G. Love you, Radix. You were brilliant on FTN. Jazz Hands is super smart and funny. Hopefully he has you back on.
Thank you, Jimmy. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Jimmy. That's a cool haircut you have.
Yeah.
Matthew Hammond, some in the FBI pursue actual cases of fraud, trafficking, or crimes, and others seem to be entrapping people. How do we know the difference in legitimate charges versus trumped up charges?
That's a very good question. And I would suggest that you look at what Steve Friend has said, the FBI whistleblower who was working these child trafficking cases, was literally pulled off of that to work J6 cases, which is why he ended up getting in trouble with the FBI, because he was like complaining about this. But I would say that in these real cases, you can see the evidence, like in these fraud cases and trafficking cases, there are, just look at the evidence. Is there evidence that this actually happened? For the Whitmer case, there's out of hours, we're talking thousands of hours of video, audio recordings from multiple informants wearing these recording devices, sometimes 5 people at one event recording everything. Not once can we hear all of the 6 defendants agreeing to a plan. So if that evidence existed, by the way, it'd been broadcast everywhere. That would have been the front and center of their little kangaroo court show
Democrats
trial.
would still be juicing it. Oh, yeah.
Exactly. So just look at the evidence. I'd say look less at what the news reports about stuff and look at the documents yourself. Read the indictments in these cases. Look at the exhibits that are attached. Go through it yourself. And usually you can see very quickly when something's real or not.
I feel like also if it falls off the news cycle quickly, like the trans school shooter, like Las Vegas, I mean, like all these things that they can't milk, that either I just feel like are flags that are false. I'm enjoying the chat being like, Christina's trying to save your algorithm and you keep asking her what things stand for. I'm just like, oh, right. But I just want to know. I like these questions. Oh, well, there's always Rumble. Deranged lunatic. Remember Ashley Babbitt was her name. Yes.
That's
Ashley
right.
Babbitt.
And look what they've done, to her mother. They have arrested her numerous times for just trying to show up and ask questions and make sure people don't forget her daughter. It's disgusting.
It's so horrible to have gone through that. It's like you can't, and you don't want to get to a place where you can't trust anybody, where you're afraid to join a Facebook group, I guess, or make a friend. But it does seem at this point that Facebook is very sus and highly compromised, and just censorship alone. It's like, why would you fuck with Facebook at this point? But
yeah,
they want to get you apathetic and weak and keep you stupid and distracted and encourage mental illness.
Exactly.
That's what I'm learning.
And they don't want, men coming together, training together, becoming proficient in firearms, able to defend themselves, their families, their properties, their businesses. They don't want people to be self-sufficient or independent. I think that's a big thing that they don't like. One interesting aspect to this is one of the guys that they tried to frame as like a ringleader in this case. They actually created a whole new category, right? In a criminal enterprise or criminal conspiracy, the ringleader is supposed to be like, that's the top person, right, of the crime. They created a whole new category called spiritual leader. They said at Barry's sentencing, not only did they quote his interviews with me for my documentary to say that Barry is unrepentant and completely radicalized because he won't say that he's guilty of something he didn't do. They said that he was the, quote, spiritual leader of the group. And you're like, spiritual leader of a crime? What is a spiritual leader of a so-called crime or a conspiracy to commit a crime? A spiritual
it's like they didn't
leader.
do anything, but they're still trying to blame them for something.
Not only did they not do anything, it's like, this isn't like a mosque, a case that involves like a mosque or like a religious group or something. Like, at no point is there anything like weird or religious happen. What does that mean? He's a spiritual leader.
Created the Pinterest board.
So they gave him 20. Yeah, they gave him 20 years in prison versus Adam, who they said for 2 years was the ringleader of the group. They gave him 16 years. They give Barry 20 and say, oh, he's actually the spiritual leader because Barry was, I believe, the main target of this. He was the one under investigation, the longest, going back to May of 2019, for reasons that are not clear. They claim they got a report about him having a firearm he wasn't supposed to have, but the month prior in April, he'd been pardoned by a Democrat governor of Delaware for something. It was a crime he did when he was a young kid, like he was 20, and he got a full pardon for that. So whoever called in this anonymous tip about him having like illegal firearms or something, they had to have known they were lying. And if they didn't, the FBI very easily could have looked that up. There is like their predicate for opening things are silly things like that. And we interestingly saw that with the J6 stuff and the so-called sedition hunters, where there are apparently people that the FBI is using to outsource basically their work for them. And they're giving them, I think, access to proprietary tools and technology that have facial recognition and things like that to identify people. And then they file an anonymous tip, and then the FBI can use that as a predicate to open an investigation. They don't have to have probable cause like real law enforcement, like your local police. My local like sheriff, he can't just open an investigation on me without having probable cause that something has occurred. For the FBI, someone can submit an anonymous tip and they go, oh, well, we have to look into it then.
Wow, they don't have to get their hands dirty. Very clever. I think this comment from Checkpoint is very relevant, that gangs can be infiltrated, and that's why they want to encourage, the basically dissolving of nuclear families. Like the culture is very anti-family, but we're human beings. We need community. We need to not be alone. It's not healthy to be alone. So people, if they're not part of a family, or they come from a broken family, or they don't have that support group, and that's why we have basically trans is the new religion now. And
it's a state religion,
and that these gangs can be infiltrated, whereas like a family is almost impossible to infiltrate. I guess you have to marry in. It's more of a commitment, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, this documentary sounds incredible, Christina. If you guys are like what you're hearing and you want to help support Christina, you can go to knkfilm.com to learn more, or to throw her a couple bucks if you want to support the making of this documentary.
That's right. You'll make the FBI seethe.
Yes. Does the donate button immediately put you on a watch list?
No, I swear. So for the donations, we have that should take people to, yes, they're right there. I have the Give, Send, Go link. You can donate anonymously using that donation link. I promise you're not going to get on a list. You can donate anonymously through Give, Send, Go. But I would suggest to people that we're already all on lists. If you like, it's to the point now, like if you are a concerned parent, if you are somebody that attends Catholic Latin Mass, oh my gosh, it's the silliest things now apparently make you dangerous. So we're all probably on lists. So.
But at least we're in good company.
That's right. Yeah.
And if you want to share the trailer, you can get it from my Twitter feed or Christina's Twitter feed. Definitely follow her if you're not already on Twitter at NotRadix, NotRadix, or you can follow the account for the documentary at KNK Film. Anything else that we forgot? You're just a wealth of information, Christina.
So
I'm going to have to listen back to this on slow just so I absorb everything.
There's so much more you guys will learn in the documentary about this, like aspects of this that I think are super, super important. And hearing it from people the family members of these people, hearing it from the men themselves and their words of what they experienced, I think that is unparalleled for any other reporting on this story. You can report on it all you want as an outsider, but to hear it from them, I think, is the best way for people to really understand what happened, because what happened did not just happen to them. Their families have been victimized. And I mean, to the point where I think people don't understand the prison industrial complex in our country, but the prison system, I didn't know anything about navigating the prison system. And I'm now trying to get approved for visitation at a Supermax facility. It's what has happened, like when they were held at Newaygo County, each phone call, 15-minute phone call is $5. 40-minute video visit is $16. So every time just to talk to a loved one, they bleed you with money. Money for commissary. Everything is so expensive for people in these prisons. And I would say that, number one, the case isn't over. This case was broken up into 3 cases. People should ask themselves why that was. One was the federal case with 6 defendants, but then there were 8 other men charged in 2 separate state cases for providing material support and gang membership. There are still 3 men going to trial next month. In August, I believe, for that. So I would ask people to please pray for them and remember it's not over. They're still trying to pretend that this was a thing. They're trying to, I'm sure, pressure these men into taking plea deals because I don't think that they want to really examine the evidence. But also, there are 2 innocent men in prison right now, Adam and Barry. Adam Fox framed as the ringleader. He's currently at Florence Supermax. And Barry is at Terre Haute Supermax. Barry is being moved to the Communications Management Unit. They won't say why, but the CMU is for, basically, it would be to prevent like an international terrorist figure from being able to conduct attacks from in prison. So that's why they would have the Communications Management Unit to monitor all communications with the outside. It's basically the leader of like a criminal organization can't be a shot caller from behind bars. And they say, oh, all conversations have to be in English because they don't want people speaking in Arabic, because this was, again, these prisons were designed to house Al-Qaeda terrorists after 9/11. And so these CMUs, there's zero accountability with the Bureau of Prisons. They withhold letters. All of my communications with these men are monitored. Barry is very concerned for his life because there have been people that have died in these prisons. They're designed for criminals, people who are already serving life sentences. He said that they call it in prison terminology a dropout yard, where they basically send people to die. And moving him to the CMU is going to limit his communications with the outside even more. Barry does not need to be in a CMU. Him talking to his 3 daughters, his fiance, and his elderly mother is not a threat to national security. It's ridiculous. And so he's already down to, at these supermaxes, they get 1 15-minute phone call per month, and then they get a 3-inch rubber pencil to write letters with. And so they've already, like, my ability to communicate with these men and make sure that they're okay health-wise has been hampered. And once he gets moved to the CMU, I don't know if I'll ever be able to speak to him again, and we don't know what will happen to him. But what it seems like is that Barry in particular has raised the ire of these people, and it seems to me that they're trying to maneuver him into a position where something happens to him, and some person already serving a life sentence, hey, a little commissary, maybe he gets shanked or something. We really don't know. Anything could happen. So I just encourage people to pray for him and share this information. We need to get their stories out because somebody needs to do something about this. The Weaponization Committee, this is the perfect example of weaponization of the federal government against the American people. I don't know any other thing, maybe besides J6, that is comparable. So they should be investigating this.
Yeah, absolutely. Damn, Christina, you really know your shit. Thank you so much for coming on. We got one more super chat from Owen Benjamin. Highlights, new to this channel but digging it so far. Stopped by to see Radix. Thanks for having her on. Ree. Wow, I'm amazed. I can't wait for this documentary to come out. Everyone check out the Give Send Go. Throw Christina a couple bucks if you can. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you to the chat. A lot of you were very smart and had very good comments and questions. So I appreciate you guys. And I will see everybody back here at 8 p.m. I will have Owen Benjamin back on the channel. So that should be a fun chat.
That'll be exciting.
Ooh, who else? And then more people that I'm scheduling. So stay tuned, everybody. I could do a better on my re week. I don't read too much. I'll have to practice my re. All right. Thanks, guys. We will see you next time.